Thanks to the first two speakers for their interesting talk. The next topic that I will be presenting will, at least compared to watchmaking, be maybe a bit more practical, useful, depending on obviously your kind of area. But if you're kind of into mainstream things, it might be more useful, but maybe kind of less interesting. So what we're going to talk about is easy decoupled site building with GraphQL and Next.js. As said, we're quite tight on time, so I will compress things quite fast, hopefully. I'll actually set the timer that I remember to finish in 15 minutes and then continue for a few minutes more. But in any case, so this will, by default, presume that you know a lot more about JavaScript than I do. That's the first thing that you need to remember, because I have done JavaScript for a long time, but I kind of understand it, but not really. So first, a few things about me. So I've been doing web development for over 20 years, for 17 years to get money, but even before for fun. So I'm interested in all kind of things related to technology. So not only web pages and so on, but pretty much everything. Currently, I mostly work with content things, mostly because I hate to do forms. And if I do application development, I have to create forms. And forms are horrible still. I do have a working knowledge of TypeScript and JavaScript, which is pretty much the same thing. And also mostly then also Symfony and PHP. So those are the languages that I do type somewhat fluently. My day job is at Easy Systems. It's a company who creates fantastic content management tools for companies such as the Financial Times, The Economist, Comcast, and Telefonica, for example. And as you can imagine, enterprise-grade content management can be quite boring, so I do other things as well during night times at a small business which pays the hosting for my hobbies. And what we talk about today, or what I will talk about, is what one of the things that I have experimented with, but I thought it would be useful to share because it might be useful for somebody else as well. But anyway, if you see this image is me. It's my personal branding. I created with GIMP, so it's great.
Where's the green velvet verse?
I don't know. Let's see. But in any case, that's enough about me, because we need to move forward. So we will talk about a bit basics. So decoupled site building, what is it? Then a brief introduction to GraphQL and Next.js, what are they? Then we'll take a brief walkthrough of the actual Hello World application, which I have created with these two technologies. And then finally, hopefully I will take the time to actually get to my experiences kind of as a layman of these things, where I might have give some value on how they might actually work, in my opinion, or not. So first of all, decoupled site building. As discussed, websites have been around for a long time. You don't get rich by building a WordPress site unless you build a WordPress site in 5 minutes, then you can be rich. But in any case, so for decoupled building, decoupled site building, it's technically that you have some kind of API from a content management system that you get only the data, and in some way you create a website or even a mobile application, something like that, then will be consumed. And traditionally it's REST-based or some kind of JavaScript kludge, so you just have, output some kind of JSON instead of that kind of tiresome academic REST where you have to get everything for everything and so on. We've all probably taken some shortcuts there. Good. But anyway, so in any case, there's been obviously for a number of years, there's been a buzz around, decoupled things, and you can build things with REST APIs and so on, which is nice. But so far, it's not the standard way of creating sites. Probably if you have 9 out of 10 websites in Finland probably are nowadays probably something like WordPress or Drupal, but very few are actually built in a decoupled way. And if it is, it's kind of a boutique thing that we've just decided to build our own website like this. And because this kind of basic content management stuff is very bulk stuff. You can't really like spend time on a customer site to make it very fancy, and then, or you can, but then probably you won't make much money out of the project. So in this case, obviously, then you have specific groups where this can actually build you value, that you have an outstanding content-driven website. But for many cases, it's actually, nobody cares how you build it. As long as you build it fast and cheap. But that said, so to the brief introduction to these two technologies, which I am an amateur, but I think that's also where I can give you value because I don't know these. So anyway, these are two separate technologies that I think work very well together, and both are very opinionated. They don't leave space for, let me just figure out how I would like to put these things together, because that kind of thing is then the time that takes time away from the things that you need to produce very quickly and efficiently. And in this case, the end result is just a website. It's a website, but the key thing here is that the first load is server-side rendered React in this case, and then subsequently, if you click around, then you jump into the API-driven thing. So only the first time you get all the boilerplate HTML and so on. And as said, specific cases, for example, the economist.com has been now for 6 months or so. It's been driven by similar approach. It actually uses GraphQL, but not Next.js. But in any way, so this is one case where if publishing is your thing, then this can be valuable. And since I don't want to ever tie myself too much into any technology, so there's a few different ways that you can obviously build similar things. At least if you're into Vue, you can use Next.js, and then something from I think it was Netflix to GraphQL. There's Falcor, which is a similar kind of a thing from them. And who knows what's coming outside, because you can render JavaScript both on the client side and the server side just as well nowadays. So GraphQL quickly. So I didn't type here, but probably most of you know about GraphQL, at least by name. So from Facebook released only 2 years ago. It seems like it's ages ago, but only 2 years ago. So it's an alternative to REST, and it's a query language for your API. It's not a GraphQL SQL, but actually it can be, because there's a GraphQL database that actually uses this syntax for its system. But as said, you can dive into these later if you want to get more information. As said, it's a REST alternative. The key thing here is it doesn't use verbs. Everything is a post. You post, you want to update, you post when you want to request. You don't have the verbs that you have in REST. And implementations already exist in realm of CMS for many CMS and content APIs. For this presentation or demo, I also tried at least Cosmic.js as well as Graph CMS, both of which were Fisher Prize toys to me. So I chose not to use them because I didn't feel comfortable with them. But anyway, one of the key things which you can get advantage as opposed to REST is that you can embed resources within a single request. So instead of sending, give me all the members, 50 members, and then for each of those you want the profile image, you would get a total of 51 HTTP requests. One of the key things here is obviously then that you can do that in one. You can see intro video, just references, and so on. As said, we'll move fast. If you get lost, don't worry. I'm also lost. So for Next.js, first release was in 2016. It's not even a year old. It's moved forward very fast, but it is a JavaScript framework. It's not a library, it's a framework that is universal. It handles rendering and routing both on the client and the server side. It happens to use React.js currently for the view layer. You can use Preact.js if you don't like patents or whatever that is. But in any case, so you can probably use a lot of other things as well. But the key thing here is that a framework has already made a lot of decisions for me, and that's what I like. I don't want to invest too much thinking what is the best routing way, because somebody decided, well, this is how you route, well, this is how you route, and so on. It is very simple to get started with, but it is also very customizable, so you can use different node frameworks. You can use Express or Koa to do your backend stuff and so on. And enough about that. Again, you can find more information. One note is it is actually from a company called Zeit, and there's some Finnish guys also working on this product. So I'm not sure if they're here, but anyway, I think it's a really, really nice product from my experience. Then we'll go into the kind of demo. So because I like to do hello worlds, because that's all my attention span is enough for, for this session I created something which you also have the source code so you can see how it's built, but it's technically an example of how you can use this technology pair together. It's a conference site for the largest Finnish-speaking React conference in Finland. It's this October. Welcome everybody. But technically this is just a simple website where you can go to react.nu. So you can go and you can click the links, and from within this network you can see different things. So if I click here, it only does the GraphQL request, and you can also see other pages, but then the point here is that what you have is a server-side rendered application. But I didn't need to know how this is built, and that's why I like it. That's why I think it can be useful for content management, which is very low-margin business. So in any case, this is kind of the core thing which I wanted to just to do a hello world on, and it's together with GraphQL. I think it was quite interesting to do. So in this case, for the backend, I used what I use daily at work. So I use the Easy Platform tool, which is a content management system, which is based on a tree structure and obviously a lot of other things as well. But I have a root node here, so just you have a rough idea on how the backend looks like. So very simple content structure, but I also have a GraphQL view into this. So if you see an interface like this, this is GraphQL. It's a client to GraphQL, which is very good. One of the key things which I didn't mention about GraphQL is that the API sends its documentation over to the client. It's called introspection or some fancy word, but introspection, well, I can't spell it now. But in any case, I can open any GraphQL API and see what kind of queries I can make. I can also do modifications, but queries are here. This query or whatever you can do here is always dependent on your application domain, obviously. So GraphQL doesn't mean that everything will work in the same way. But for example, in the case where we had this example, I can look that we have, this is location ID 68. I know the domain, how this works. So we have a child. So we have location children. And because we get a lot of information from the API, I also get auto-completion. So I can write location children. Let me see if I can get this a little bit bigger. Then I get ID nothing, because it's I didn't send any ID. So what I need to do is send 68 to it. And this is the GraphQL syntax. So what I'm doing is I'm now getting location children. By default, it gives me IDs because IDs are required. I can also get more things. I can get the values or content, yes, because this is a location object. Location doesn't have any fields. I can expand from here, and then I can get the values here, or fields, yes. I can get the fields here. If I want from the field, I want the individual values, I can get them like this. and you can see basically that it works like this. So any kind of request I make to the backend, it will return it in the same exact shape. As said, it's only a syntax, and you need to obviously have all the implementation for your application as well. But the key here is, as opposed to a REST, you will have kind of different responses depending on your query and so on. Good. That was quite fast, hopefully. So one thing that we can then take a look at is just a quick look at the functionality. So one of the key things about Next is that if I have here it running, so if I have just on my local, if I add one single file, it's an entry point which will then boot a single component, which in this case will be about. And all I need to do is to write a very simple stateless component. And the framework will now already handle everything for me, in the sense that this about page where I had it here, then if I click to, I will clear this. If I click here, so a lot of consultants will miss money because they couldn't spend, I don't know, 20 days on server-side rendering because, well, I just created one in 5 minutes. So it's natural progression, and probably there's some opinions which you may not like, but it is very efficient if you want this kind of thing. And then that was obviously very simple and had nothing to do with GraphQL. It was just a very basic hello world. But then if you do want to send parameters to the backend, so in this case we have React Now and activity/73. If you want this backend to receive parameters which it can't receive when it's just like index.php, you would like index.php and question mark ID equals 73. It's very similar. So you do need a custom server, but the custom server, technically you just pass some parameters, and then you can hook on to those parameters and then perform some actions there. As said, you will have access to the full glorious layout and all of the code for your own experiments and so on. As said, the code base of Next.js is actually very nice in the sense that they give you examples of how you would do things, because some of the things which are very simple are not very simple to do in an environment like this, like Google Analytics. Normally, well, I just want Google Analytics, just paste the tag. But here, no, you need to make sure you download everything, because it's JavaScript, it's fancy. But in any case, back to the point. So in our IndexJS, because you can nest multiple different queries into a single query within GraphQL, here I get the main content here. So this is technically just this, but I also do get the navigation menu here. So going back here, the Next.js has it's a React class or component class or component object. When you add get initial props, then this is the one that will initialize it and so on. Now I need to really speed up because I'm already 15 minutes, but it's good. So here, pretty standard stuff. I'm using the ES6 template literals, and then I get the ID, then I pass that. This is my GraphQL specific to this page. It has some, because I could also serve something else than HTML, but I can also get the activities. So in this case, a single request will also yield the child objects. So I will only do one request, which is very good. And obviously, whatever you kind of feel like doing is then standard, React work, and so on. Navigation, obviously, then you can reuse your components across different pages and so on. But then to the actual meat of it. So what I kind of view as valuable, because I kind of work every day with this kind of things. So I think this does allow a good thing. The best thing is that it allows you to try new things, because you can get really stuck in like, well, I can just create a website really fast. Well, yeah, you can create it like 55 times, but this will allow you to create it again and again. And it has some structure which is defined. So instead of one person building a website and then nobody ever will know how to update that because, well, that person left. Well, it's just a website, yeah, but it's so hard it can't be updated. Okay, and we go to somebody else. I do like React's templating engine because it forces structure. It's like XSL. You have to have it valid, so it's good. Also, you could export HTML from the Next.js supports that you export HTML. So then you don't even need to run Node on a server. You just run HTML on a server somewhere, which is really good. I don't know how you would do it with a dynamic thing like this, but technically you can do it. I did find that it's opinionated, but for me it was flexible enough. Maybe if you have some thought or that this is wrong, this is how it shouldn't be done, maybe it's not good for you. It does allow you to have no compromise SEO, because the server renders the HTML for the first time, so the robots will get the full HTML, which is good. And then of course you can use whatever React you could then pick up from there and create sort of the same kind of things and so on. I think for even more than sites, I would say e-commerce is where you actually make money of the site. So for e-commerce, this is probably really, really good, because you can have a horrible Magento thing with an API and still create a great front end with a horrible back end. Not to say that it's something like that, but anyway, yeah, so you can use whatever things you're used to and so on. And of course you can take this up a notch. You can integrate some kind of MobX or other state management tools which you may like. So from my understanding, it's quite standard JavaScript practices that are being applied. The bad, well, there's always a curve for JavaScript, JSX. If you just want to quickly get up to it, of course, you're all, well, it's easy. But then if you ask a man from the street, how do you echo in PHP? Well, you just echo and then it works. But hey, in JSX, well, this. But then, you know, of course, you need to know a few things. So there's a more higher learning curve than in doing WordPress templating for sure. Then you lose a lot of CMS capabilities, because CMS is content management, but it has a lot to do with layout management. You create forms for feedback and all that kind of thing. So it's, you know, you have Contentful, but Contentful only gives you forms you need to do, or forms about data. So you need to add a lot more and so on. Another thing which can be complex to do is analytics. So of course you need to pick it up and make sure it loads on each virtual request or whatever you want to call it when you use just the API. But also if you just put in something, some random script, and then if it gets to React, but then it's marketing pasted something which is not valid JSX, then it will and then everybody is calling that why the website did break. Now when we had WordPress, it never broke because HTML is very resilient. You just put whatever and the browser will figure it out. It won't black or get a horrible screen on you. It will kind of look like shit, but it's still good. Yeah, then obviously regular HTTP caching strategies won't work because it's post, and then you have like two different things. You have one server-side rendered view. If you cache that, then what if your feed is not cached, and then you can end up probably in a new world of issues, especially if you're thinking about sort of site building. Then still, like server plus browser development can be quirky. I noticed this when I was doing just the basic GraphQL things. The course, obviously the server didn't mind that I didn't have course headers, it just got that, but the browser was like, what? So this is the kind of thing that most of the things, if you look now, there's really good utilities for isomorphic fetch, so you can do, or the GraphQL library which I use, so you use it both on server and client, which is mostly very good, but I can imagine you will have some kind of headaches, which very simple thing will actually be very hard. Yeah, and of course it's from Facebook, and there's patents. So I don't know. GitHub uses it, so maybe they're fucked also if they use it for patents. I don't know. The ugly one, does it really provide any value? I don't know, because the initial page load, the initial volume is higher. If your user will never surf only that one website, well, that doesn't really matter. So it's kind of, well, it's not going to be any kind of fantastic experience because you can have it without this. Another one is obviously the first load, especially if you don't use caching for your backend generated code, you will need to render that each time for each user using React, which is not like, even if it's Node, you still have to do a lot of work instead of just sending out an HTML blob. So it will kind of create your CPU bounds server load, and also then the API calls will block. If your API is really slow, then the initial response will be really slow because you kind of just wait to get the GraphQL or any response in the first time. So it's a kind of can be even worse. And then I can imagine like the caching stuff, which I briefly talked about, can get really hairy and difficult and hard to find bugs if you go really fancy. Fancy regarding login, or then you just don't cache maybe at all for logged users is one option. Then one thing that I can actually think about is the GraphQL you could see that is very open. It tells you exactly what it can do. So it's also a security hazard because it tells you, well, you can find all users here. Then like, okay, let me try if I can find all users. Oh, I can find every user. So if it really just like tells you that what you can do. So probably if you do want to expose a public GraphQL API, I would create a separate endpoint which you specifically select what you want to show, not have like a default one like this. Because also another thing regards to security is that vulnerable to GraphQL injections. Because I can imagine then that if we take a look at this code, maybe here, yes, here. So what I'm writing here is GraphQL inline. So I don't know, probably this ID, I didn't sanitize it at all. So, but anyway, probably it's like you'll just escape and do SQL injection, but in GraphQL. So I can imagine that's one thing that if you just kind of are intoxicated with the power of GraphQL, then this will happen. And then somebody will be angry because things work fast, but were shit. Good. We're a bit over time, but you can find the slides there. Easiest way and best place to find them is obviously by clicking React Now. And then there's a view source link, so you can find the source. And you can find the whole application, not the API. The API is locked down, so you cannot find it. But if you're interested in how it works, this is where you can get to the details. And obviously then, yeah, the slides are also there. Will probably be shared by the team for the event. So thank you for this time. Hope you have some understanding now. And if you have any questions, I can try to answer them, but I pretty much told you everything I know. Yeah.
I've actually seen the slides before. Is this on? No. What? It's on? Yeah. All right. So yeah, I think like thanks for the talk. It's interesting. We've been actually building a publishing website for the past 9 months with this exact stack, except for the Next.js. We have a homebrew Express app doing the SSR at a Finnish publishing company, and we're actually using PHP as a backend for the GraphQL server. So if you're into PHP, you should try the Yoshido library.
Yeah, this also has a PHP backend currently.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
I know there's 2 bundles, but I didn't come here to talk about PHP.
Yeah, all right. So, so for us, like the concerns you had hasn't been that much. Like there's been like at least no performance issues. We have like a very quick responsive API, and there's no blocking actions or anything like that. But of course, you have to kind of put your mind into it, like how you build it. But I would like to ask a little bit, like quickly, about what's the opinionated part about Next.js. Like, what's the most opinionated part that you found?
Because I have maybe limited amount, I didn't really find the only opinionated thing. It has to be really kind of like React. So one thing, by the way, about Next.js is the NPM.
You can't use React Router probably either.
I think it uses React Router probably
okay.
by default. But anyway, I think this search is actually probably built using Next.js. So obviously longevity is one question, but I think this is one of the example cases where they have actually used Next.js. And if you use it on NPM, maybe somebody else also uses it. Yeah. But
Yep.
for me, as said, nothing came into my way. But then again, I only build websites without forms.
Yeah, we have some forms.
Yeah.
They have been working like pretty well.
Yeah, because
with mutations.
I imagine that you could integrate any kind of React thing into the flow.
Yeah. If someone's like interested in this stack, you can come ask me. We're using Apollo for the client, so that has been working really well. I'll be glad to talk about it if you want to hear more. So, yeah, thanks, I guess. Anyone else?
More questions? Okay.
All right.
Good. Okay. We're probably twice the time, but it's bad enough. Thank you.